If you've applied for asylum in the United States, you need to know about the deceptive question that trips up many asylum seekers every year. A question so misleading that it can single-handedly destroy your chances of winning asylum. This question has ruined countless otherwise strong cases. I'm going to make sure that you don't fall into this trap, and we're starting right now. I'm Brian Manning, and I used to be an asylum officer with the government, but now, as an asylum lawyer, well, I help immigrants all over the country to secure their future in America through asylum. Let me know in the comments if you got an asylum case pending, or maybe you're considering applying. And listen, I'd especially like to hear from you. If you've been waiting for an asylum interview with USCIS for multiple years, let me know how long you've been waiting. Let me tell you about this trap question that asylum officers routinely ask during interviews. Here it is, more or less word for word. Have you ever lied or misrepresented anything to a U.S. immigration officer or in connection with any U.S. immigration application, whether in writing or orally? Okay, it could vary slightly in delivery, but that's the thrust of it. It's asking whether you've been less than honest in any way as it relates to a U.S. immigration matter. So when most people hear this question, well, they immediately think, no, of course not. I've been telling the truth about my asylum claim. And so then they quickly answer no. That seemingly innocent response could be the beginning of the end for your asylum case. Why? Because this question is designed to expose a very specific type of inconsistency that the officer can then use against you. Let me explain exactly how this trap works. Most asylum officers ask this question near the beginning of your interview, and it seems like a simple sort of background question. So, you answer it and then you forget about it. But then later in the interview, typically toward the end, the officer will ask you something like, hey, when you left your country, you were doing it to flee persecution, right? And you'll likely say, yes, that's correct. And then comes the follow-up. So, was that the reason that you applied for your US visa, so you could flee persecution? So if you say yes, which many people do, the officer now has what they consider an inconsistency in your testimony. Why? Because when you applied for your visa, maybe a tourist visa, student visa, or business visa, you almost certainly told the US visa officer that you were coming to the United States temporarily for, tourism, education, or business, not to seek asylum and stay permanently, right? So then at your asylum interview, the officer will say something like, well, that's interesting because here in our records, I can see your visa application where you stated your purpose for coming to the United States was tourism, for example. And in fact, the visa officer's notes from that interview say that as well, that you said that you wanted to visit just for a couple weeks for vacation. But earlier today in this asylum interview, you told me you've never misrepresented anything to a US immigration officer. But now you're admitting that you actually came here intending to seek asylum, not for tourism, as you claimed on your visa application and at your visa interview. And so just like that, you've been caught in what the asylum officer considers a contradiction. You see, you said earlier in your asylum interview that you had never lied to an immigration officer, but now you've essentially admitted that, yeah, you did. You just admitted that you lied in connection with your US visa application, perhaps quite a long time ago. By the way, if you want to maximize your chances for asylum success, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so that you don't miss the insights that I share on this channel. Okay, so why does this matter so much? Well, because it's viewed as an inconsistency. And you see, inconsistencies are one of the main reasons that asylum cases get denied. When an asylum officer finds multiple inconsistencies in your testimony or between your testimony and written materials, well, they can make what's called a negative credibility finding. This means they don't believe you're telling the truth, and therefore they won't believe your claims of persecution. And listen, I can't stress enough how serious this is. When I worked as an asylum officer, I saw countless cases denied on credibility grounds. And the sad truth is that many officers are actively looking for inconsistencies that they can use to justify a denial. So how do you handle this trick question properly? Well, here's what you need to do. First, you need to think carefully about your actual intentions when you applied for your US visa. Did you already know at that point that you would seek asylum when you arrived in the United States? Or maybe did something change after you arrived that made you decide to seek asylum? If you knew before applying for your visa that you would seek asylum in the United States, then listen, the honest answer to the question, have you ever lied to a US immigration officer, is yes. You should acknowledge that you didn't disclose your true intentions when applying for your visa. Now, you may be thinking, but Brian, wouldn't that be admitting to a lie or a so-called inconsistency? Well, yes, but listen, first, honesty is the best policy. You should be honest, open, and transparent in your asylum case. And second, this admission will not hurt your asylum case. In fact, asylum officers understand that people fleeing persecution often cannot be completely honest about their intentions when applying for visas. If they were to tell the consular officer, the visa officer, well, hey, I'm coming to seek asylum because I'm being persecuted, well, they would be denied the visa. USCIS policy recognizes this reality. Misrepresentations made for the purpose of fleeing persecution are generally forgiven in the asylum context. Now, what's not forgiven is lying about it during your asylum interview. So what gets you denied is the statement at your asylum interview that you've never lied in connection with a US immigration matter, if you in fact have. So if the officer asks if you've ever misrepresented anything to an immigration officer, and you did in fact misrepresent your intentions when getting your visa, well, you can answer with something like this. Yes, when I applied for my tourist visa, I didn't mention that I was afraid for my life and planning to seek asylum. I knew that if I told the visa officer my true intentions, I would probably be denied the visa, and I needed to escape the danger in my country, so I lied, and I am sorry about that. Okay, listen. The same advice applies to what you told the Customs and Border Protection officer when you entered the United States. I'm talking about when you went through the immigration checkpoint upon arrival at the airport in the United States, when you had what was probably a very brief encounter with a CBP immigration official. If they asked about your purpose for traveling to the United States and you did not mention asylum, well, you should acknowledge this when asked at your asylum interview if you've ever misrepresented anything to an immigration officer, if you in fact planned at that moment to seek asylum here. Now, what if you genuinely didn't plan to seek asylum when you got your visa or when you arrived at the airport? Because look, this happens with some frequency. What if something changed after you arrived in the United States that made you decide to apply for asylum? In that case, you can truthfully answer no to the question about misrepresentations, but you should probably clarify your answer by saying something like, no, I haven't misrepresented anything. When I applied for my visa, I truly intended to come to the United States temporarily for tourism. However, after I arrived, the situation in my country worsened, or, whatever, I received new threats, or whatever specific circumstances that you're facing, which is why I decided to apply for asylum. So this clarification is crucial because it preempts the trap that the officer might try to set later in the interview. Okay, now you're ready to address this issue head on, and to do so with integrity. If you're ready to take the next step and get help with your asylum case, then please call my office today. That number is 713-909-0401. And remember, we help people all over the country, so it doesn't matter where you live. Call us now to schedule an asylum strategy session so that we can help you to secure your future in America through asylum. Again, I'm Brian Manning, and it's an honor to serve you in your asylum journey.